Let's have a look at the Vodacom quarterly update. Important numbers, and there's some sort of differing opinions about whether the market should be looking at this stock compared to what it was doing in the previous quarter or what's doing now. It's all to do with data, and on the in the Joburg studio now is Irnest Kaplan, MD of Kaplan Equity Analysts. It's all to do with data, Irnest, and it's all to do with the fact that you can't analyse this stock as you did do 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes, quite right. Thanks, Lindsay. It is all about data, and I think the important point to mention in this result, it wasn't a full result, it was just a quarterly number, so we only get insight into the revenue. And importantly, at a group level, revenue was down 1% year on year. Now, cast your mind back a few years ago, you were seeing 10, 15, 20% growth. And now we're down to 1. So question is, how much longer is it going to be before the revenue starts going negative? And the key thing that Lindsay said there was, it's all about data. So data is growing fast. It's growing grew at about 20%. It remains to be seen whether it can hold up against that big ship of voice, which is moving slowly down.
Tell us about that, because Vodacom did mention that they're increasing their CapEx spend, though, in data infrastructure.
Yeah, look, I mean, I choose to look at Vodacom very simply. You've got a company here whose South African voice revenue went down 12%. Okay, there were some funnies in this quarter that they explained on the conference call, so it's not quite exactly the case. And there is an impact from MTRs, which have still been going down. Next year, the impact won't really be as much. But the point is, voice revenue going down by 10%, but voice minutes going up by 10%. Now, to handle those minutes, you've got to spend more on CapEx. And your cost base is not getting smaller. There's inflation. So there's a problem over here on the voice side. And I think while data is very important, I think for the next year or two, Vodacom's going to do very well to just stay level.
Irnest, Lindsay again, it's not easy for this company to adapt. In other words, if you're a gold mining company or a resources company, you can say, well, I don't like iron ore, so therefore I'm going to halve off this business. I'm going to sell this business here and there. You can't just say to yourself, well, I like data growth, so therefore I'm going to focus on that. I've got to get rid of the other things. How do they adapt to the numbers we've just seen? Because they really are quite meaningful and quite telling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think what they're going to do is push more data and try and get data to grow better and even faster. And today on the conference call, CEO Shamil Jusuf explained at great lengths what they're trying to do to grow the data, things like converting people from using 3G to 4G and getting more smartphones out in the market. So that's all good and well. But the point remains that the voice is still a big portion of the business, and to the extent that reduces or slows down or gets even worse than we saw in these sort of numbers, it's going to be that much harder for them to make up for it with the data.
My question is, how does NeoTel boost revenue potentially? How does that potential acquisition then convert the slowing business? Will that be able to turn the picture around? Well,
it's a good question, and I think it remains to be seen. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work, to be honest. NeoTel is a fairly small player in the fixed line market, and I think the sort of feeling is that a lot of the reason why Vodacom's going for NeoTel is to gain access to very scarce spectrum, so that they can use that spectrum in their mobile business. As we all know, the fixed line market is a total separate discussion. It's also in decline in many of its sub-areas, as we've seen in Telkom's case, notwithstanding Telkom's share price increase. But, the actual market is not growing at huge rates. So I think if you bolt on NeoTel, I don't think you're going to get Vodacom's ship, as it were, growing at 20% plus or being what it was in the past. That does not mean, by the way, with all this negativity, that Vodacom's not a good investment. Because remember, it's producing wonderful cash flows and paying out very good and strong dividends. So, you know, for a person who looks at it, or an investor who looks at it from that point of view, it is quite resilient. Even in bad times, people talk on their cell phones. So I think it's still a good good share to be in. I just think, you know, it's going to be tougher for them in the year or two ahead.
So ARPUs might be under pressure. I also know you recently did research on contract costs versus prepaid, and it almost seems as though you have a firm favorite for prepaid, where you managed to make quite a significant saving.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, you know, I don't want to make a bigger thing out of it than what it is, but in essence, I was spending 900 Rand a month to 1,000 Rand a month on my contract, and when I switched to prepaid, I'm spending 300 Rand a month, and I'm doing exactly the same.
Now,
So,
what happens if half of South Africa does that? What's the impact on Vodacom, Irnest?
yeah, look, I mean, in Vodacom and MTN's defense, you know, they are giving a lot more value that I may perhaps not be utilizing fully in my contract. And that potentially is where some of that saving comes. But I mean, at 60 cents a minute on MTN, it's a no-brainer. I was paying R1.60 a minute in my contract with a forced spending amount each month. So I think, you know, the pricing pressure, this just shows pricing pressure. So I'm giving them 300 Rand a month now, not 1,000 Rand a month. So from me, they're losing out 700 Rand. I'm not ramping my data so much that I'm now spending 1,500 Rand a month because of my data. My data is like, I'm not even using what I'm buying. So the data is a small portion for me. Maybe for others, it's different.
Exactly. Someone like Lindsay, who, as you mentioned at the top of the show, has run out of some of that data. Irnest, such a pleasure having you in this evening. That was Irnest Kaplan from Kaplan Equity Analysts.